We've reached chapter 4, Paper Boat. Z89, come to the enrichment sector now. An abrupt voice crackled through the sound system and broke into her head like a knife cutting into her thoughts. She was quietly studying in one of the learning labs, reading the play Macbeth by William Shakespeare. They had been reading the text and learning about the Tudor and Jacobean periods of history in lessons. Z89 found it all intriguing. Killing a king seemed rather extreme to her, and she was struggling with the language too. Images of Macbeth holding 2 blood-soaked knives floated before her as she continued to read. Z89 mark on. The crackly voice persisted, and a loud cough from behind made her lift her head. Miss Citrine was standing over her, waiting for her to stand to attention. Now she became alert. Z89 closed her book and returned it to the shelf above the desk. A door clicked across and the book was locked behind the glass. She stood and faced Miss Citrine, a short, rather plump woman dressed in daffodil yellow. Her hair was a mass of mousy brown curls topped by a golden ribbon. The colour of her uniform suggested a happy person, but her gaze was joyless and her mouth grim. Beryl Citrine tutted and turned sharply, her saffron heels clicking sternly away. Z89 followed, her own soft shoes silent across the floor. The enrichment sector was different from the other areas in the school. This was where children usually went if they had a blue uniform day. Z89 had been in raptures that morning when a blue uniform appeared in the drawer. She felt an emotion she didn't feel often, happiness. Further along the corridor, a door slid open and they entered. To the right was a long rail holding a variety of clothes, a rainbow of colours in several styles and sizes. Miss Citrine selected a pale lemon dress, dotted with white daisies, short sleeves and a full skirt. She turned to Z89 and gestured to a selection of shoes and pointed to a small cubicle. "Change quickly, my dear." Her voice was sugar, her smile was false. Z89 realised this was a special day. She didn't know what day or the date, but she'd been in here before and had photographs taken before a giant green screen. She changed into the dress and wiggled her feet into the cream shoes she'd chosen. Turning, she saw herself in front of the full-length mirror. A selection of wigs lay prone and lifeless on a side table. Z89 chose one, placed it on her shaven head, checked it, and then emerged from the cubicle like a butterfly from a chrysalis. "Very nice," Miss Citrine said coldly. "You will do." An orderly in a light brown uniform stood waiting for her, camera and tripod ready. Meekly, her hands clasped together, Z89 sat on a stool and smiled into the camera. She was going to enjoy her hour of enrichment. Butterfly. Erin stared, unblinking at her phone, while she scooped cereal into her mouth. "Patrick, that was Mum on the phone. Dad isn't well, so they can't come and look after the kids." Stella, Erin's mum, paced up and down, massaging her forehead with one hand. Patrick Winslow sat at the kitchen table, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. He returned it to the tiny gold saucer and sighed deeply. "The kids will be fine. Mal's 18 and Erin will be 15 tomorrow. It's about time we made them more independent." He looked across at his daughter, who was seemingly absorbed in her phone but was quietly taking in every word of their conversation. "I know, but I don't like Erin to be on her own for her birthday." Stella suddenly sat and poured herself a black coffee from the pot. The many bracelets adorning her thin wrist clicked against the table as she took her cup and drank. "She can see Petra as well. It's amazing those two share a birthday and have never celebrated together." Patrick finally took a swig of his coffee. He pushed his glasses back up to the bridge of his nose and absent-mindedly stroked his beard, now with a few touches of silver woven into the dark. His tanned face seemed to hide the fact he would be 50 next birthday. "What do you think, lovely girl?" He poked Erin in the ribs and she grunted. "Yeah, that's cool. We'll be fine. Petra and I'd already decided to party. Stella looked shocked. Oh, I don't know about that. I don't want you drinking or taking anything weird. Erin stared at her mother and sighed. We're not stupid. We're going to have a picnic up at the Stones and invite a few friends, that's all. Usual suspects, I suppose, Patrick added. Erin frowned at her dad and returned to her screen. Mal can be there to watch over them, Patrick grinned at his daughter. He knew her better than her mother did. Give her some credit, Stella. They'll have a lovely time without us. Later that morning, Erin and Mal waved their parents off. The Mercedes purred softly down the road as Stella blew kisses out of the passenger window. Right, let's get going, Mal said to his little sister, who looked the true innocent standing beside him. We have a lot to do. Mal's little white Fiat was waiting on the drive, and unbeknown to their parents, they had packed drinks, a picnic, sleeping bags, cushions, and their rucksacks. They were on a mission. As they jumped into the car and headed the same way as their parents had gone, Erin thought over the last couple of days and what had led them to deciding to follow their parents to see where they really were going. The photograph albums had just been the start of it all. Erin couldn't put her finger on what was wrong, but she knew deep in her heart something wasn't right. It was interesting to see her parents had been away for various birthdays, but Erin eventually put that down to circumstance. Her parents worked hard and her dad was often away on business. And when Petra had found the same thing had happened to her, again it was weird, but could just be chance. But it was finding the boxes hidden away in her mum's wardrobe when Erin began to put two and two together, and not even coming up with an answer. She needed to prove to Mal, after he said he'd been winding her up about going to all those countries, that she was rightly suspicious of her parents. On the same day that she had discovered the boxes, Erin had waited for her parents to go out to their respective fitness classes, and then quietly she knocked on Malachi's door. She reminded him of the photos she'd found and asked him to follow her up the stairs to their parents' room, and amazingly he had, recognising that his sister was upset about something. Erin pulled out the boxes and Mal sat looking at the tiny baby things in the photographs. He didn't know what it was all about either. He exclaimed he didn't understand why there was an M and an E intertwined on the album when there were no pictures of him to be found. His suggestion of the letters standing for the pronoun me, referring to Erin, was met with a loud silence. It was then they hatched a plan to follow their parents to see what was going on. Mal said it was probably a wild goose chase, but could see Erin was determined to do something. Mal and Erin had never been close. They were both so different, and Erin often thought Mal was boring. Always studying, not having much of a social life. She often wondered if he had ever had a girlfriend. He worked on Saturdays at a small coffee shop in Upton, and when he wasn't doing that or studying, he was playing football. Erin knew he hated being around lots of people and found being enclosed in exam rooms crammed full of sweaty bodies intolerable. There had been a few times whilst sitting his mock GCSEs when his anxiety forced him to leave the room, sweat beading across his face, stomach pains doubling him over. Moving him to a small room with just 3 other students for the main exams made a difference, and he'd achieved good grades. He now attended a sixth form college in the next town and hoped to go to university. They collected various items together and packed the car so they could follow their parents to wherever they were going. Mal had bumped into their father in the hallway. Mal was carrying sleeping bags. It's just for a sleepover, Dad, he explained. Well, as long as you're not away while we're away, I'm trusting you to look after your sister. You could trust me, Dad, Mal grinned, knowing full well what they were planning. Earlier he'd suggested to Erin they should just ask their parents, but she was adamant that idea wouldn't work. Now, sitting in Mal's pride and joy, his little white Fiat, Erin looked across at her brother. Thank you, she said. What for? Mal asked. For doing this for me. That's okay, I know you're a bit mad sometimes, but you got me thinking. I'm sure there's nothing going on. Hey, at least we could surprise Mum and Dad on my birthday. True, agreed Mal. Certainly be a surprise for them. They could see their dad's dark blue Mercedes up ahead, 2 cars in between. Their dad indicated to turn onto the motorway, and Mal followed, staying behind another car. He'd just passed his test, and this was the first time on a motorway for him. "Erin, keep them in sight. We have to stay back so they won't see us." Erin watched as the powerful Mercedes sidestepped smoothly into the fast lane. "You're going to have to speed up, Mal. You know Dad likes to drive fast." His knuckles were tightening on the steering wheel, and his face took on a determined expression. "You can do this. I trust you," she encouraged. Erin had tried to get Petra to come along with them, but Petra said she thought Erin was completely nuts, and she needed to stay at home to look after her younger brother. Erin promised to keep in touch and let her know what they found out, if anything, but Petra said quite vehemently she didn't want to know. She and Erin had parted on bad terms, and Erin was disappointed in her friend's attitude towards her. What was Petra scared of? She thought now as she helped herself to a toffee from a bag in the glove compartment. She unwrapped another and passed it to Mal, who took it without taking his eyes from the road ahead. He sighed, and it seemed to Erin he was beginning to relax into his driving. They travelled south for several hours along motorways and soon realised they were heading for Cornwall. Once they were off the motorway, it was much harder to remain hidden from their parents. There had been a few times when they felt they were getting too close to the Mercedes ahead of them, but they'd been lucky when another car pulled out from a side road and then a tractor came between them. It slowed them down, but by this time they began to recognise where they were. Erin joked Mal should be in a car chase in a movie where the good guy's following the bad guy. At this he pulled a face that clearly said, "Never again." "Welcome to Castleton," announced a large, brightly coloured sign as they approached a charming town with skinny side streets and a smattering of shops. They knew this area quite well from previous visits to a splash of a village nestling on the north coast a few miles away. Erin hoped they were going to stop soon. She'd been feeding Mal sandwiches while he drove, but he was getting tired, and they were both thankful when their dad indicated right to turn into the car park of a place called the Three Towers, a four-star hotel. They pulled over to the side of the road, and Erin hopped out, crossed the road, dodging cars as she ran to the high walls surrounding the hotel. Peering round the gatepost, she waited until she saw their mum and dad enter the reception, and then waved a signal at Mal. He pulled in and parked the car in a shady spot out of sight at the back of the building. Erin followed the little Fiat and waited while Mal turned off the engine, and he stretched. "Now what do we do?" Mal said, opening the door, unfolding himself and clambering out. "We'll have to sleep in the car." Dusk was falling, and Erin rubbed her hands to keep warm. "I'm starving," Mal said. "I saw a burger place back along the road. I'll go. I need to stretch my legs. You stay here and see if you can find out anything." Erin agreed and gave him her order, a large coffee, chicken burger and fries. She realised she was hungry too. She quickly texted Petra. Erin would keep her side of the bargain and keep her informed whether she wanted the information or not. Having recognised the town of Castleton while driving along its narrow streets, twisting and turning, underneath the remains of a castle high on a hill, Erin remembered it had not been a happy experience the last time they visited. Locking the car, she zipped up her jacket against the cold breeze that was threatening to grow into a fully fledged wind. Inside her jacket nestled the blue brooch her parents had given her that morning as an early birthday present. It was a butterfly with the words "Fly high and free" engraved upon it. Erin made her way across the car park and round to the front of the red brick building to the reception to see what might be going on, but the receptionist wasn't much help. There was no business convention going on, and no, there wasn't any training for business owners, and no, she couldn't tell Erin where Mr. and Mrs. Winslow were at this moment. Erin returned to the car, having purloined a local map and some leaflets from the receptionist. They were only about 20 miles from the sea here, and were just over the border into Cornwall. The castle that overlooked the town was, according to the leaflet, begun after the Norman conquest. Erin was fascinated by history and would have loved to visit the crumbling round tower, but not this time. A loud knock on the window made her jump. Then she saw Mal's grinning face above steaming cups and large paper bags full of food. She leaned across to open the car door for him to climb in. "Anything?" he asked. "Nothing," Erin answered. "There's no conference here," she added as she took the food he offered her. The next morning they were woken by a dawn chorus of songbirds. It was early and still dark, but a line of pink etched out the horizon like a highlighter on a sentence, and as the sun rose the castle beyond was clothed in a warm glow. It had been an uncomfortable night, Mal squeezing his tall frame into the back seat of the tiny car, while Erin stayed in the passenger seat. It was cold too. Erin finally slept, only to have strange dreams of her mum and dad living in a huge castle perched on a cliff. The waves smashed against the jagged rocks below, and lightning flashed. Erin could see them standing there on an ornate stone balcony, but she couldn't reach them. She tried to stagger across a long thin bridge that separated her and them, but the force of the wind and rain pushed her back. The rain mingled with her tears as she stood feeling desolate and abandoned. Then soft music came to her in her dream. It was insistent, getting louder, and Erin struggled into wakefulness. It was her phone alarm. She dozed and then found herself being shaken by strong arms. Rubbing her eyes and stretching like a cat, Erin asked, "What time is it?" "Just gone 7. Happy birthday, Erin." He grinned at her, his dark hair standing up in spikes. He passed her a box wrapped in brightly coloured paper. It was the bracelet she'd wanted from her favourite shop in their little town. "Thanks, Mal." She could feel tears prick her eyes as she enclosed her wrist with the strands of thin grey leather held together by a silver heart. "And thanks for doing this for me." Awkwardly, she hugged her older brother. Later, after coffee and doughnuts collected by Mal, they felt a bit more human. They took it in turns to sidle into the hotel and use the loo and have a quick wash and teeth clean. Erin waited for Mal by the car, scrolling through birthday messages from family and friends, and a brief message from Petra. An officious-looking man in a black security guard uniform suddenly came into view and stalked over to Erin. "This is private property, miss. Are you staying in the hotel? I don't seem to have your registration number on my list." "Oh, yes, we're just checking out, thank you." Erin smiled at him, hoping he would leave them alone. "We arrived late last night and didn't have time to register our vehicle." At that moment, Mal came running across the car park. "We need to get going. Mum and Dad are leaving." He tailed off as he saw the security guard and skidded to a halt. Erin could see he was trying to be nonchalant towards the situation, but she soon realised he wasn't very good at pretending. "Hi. We've just arrived to collect our parents," he explained as he sauntered across them. "Is there a problem?" "That's interesting. Sir, this young lady said you just checked out. Which is it?" Erin and Mal both started speaking at once. The man held up his hand and they paused mid-sentence. "That's enough. I don't have you registered, which means you are trespassing. If you don't leave immediately, I will be calling the police." Apologising profusely, Mal climbed into the car, telling Erin he'd seen their parents and turned on the engine. Nothing happened. The engine stayed obstinately silent. The security guard began to tap on his phone. Mal swore under his breath and tried again. Still nothing. The guard was lifting his phone to his ear when Mal tried again, and this time the car roared into life. They managed to drive away just in time as Stella and Patrick Winslow came out on the main steps. Erin caught a glimpse of her parents dressed as though they were going to a wedding, a dark blue suit for Patrick and a bright red woolen coat over a grey dress for Stella. Mal parked the car round the corner where they could get a good view. A few minutes later, their parents' car appeared at the main gates, turned left and purred past them. Following at a distance and staying well back, after about half an hour of snaking along country roads with high banks either side and few passing places, they saw their parents' car turn into a wooded area where a dusty lane led them to a car park. They held back until Stella and Patrick parked. Other cars passed them, finding parking spaces and then disgorging their passengers, all dressed to the nines. Mal pulled over under the shadow of a huge ancient oak tree, its branches stretching out as if to protect the car. Erin was the first to extricate herself. Mal soon emerged and looked around him. They glimpsed a stone building through a wooded area and started to walk along a path that wound through the trees and bushes, but abruptly stopped when they saw, in front of the open doors of what seemed to be a stately home, 2 armed guards checking their parents' bags and papers. The guards gestured to Stella and Patrick to enter, and then they disappeared from view. As they watched, the other people from the car park began to arrive. Each time they were checked thoroughly before going inside the building. It was a beautiful house, Erin observed, symmetrical with big Georgian windows filling high walls. Semicircular steps led up to the enormous double doors of dark wood. One stood open to allow guests to enter. In front was a sweeping drive of gravel that curled around the house like an elegant necklace. Evergreen shrubs of dark green, shaped into spheres, were growing within an ornamental garden to the left of the house. Stone sculptures of goddesses were placed at intervals to add interest. The cold, wintry sun was now higher in the slate-grey sky and tried to throw some rays down onto the garden to give it some warmth. Tiny green shoots were thrusting their heads hopefully out of the dark, loamy soil. Some already had nodding yellow flowers turning towards the sunshine. It was March the 1st, a Sunday, my birthday, Erin thought to herself as she drank in all that she saw. The 2 guards in black suits and dark glasses were now patrolling the front of the house. No one else entered, and it seemed everyone they were expecting had arrived. One of the guards checked a sheet on a clipboard, nodded at his colleague, and they retraced their steps, returning to the main doors. They too disappeared, and the door was closed behind them. "We'll have to try another entrance. Let's try the back," Mal whispered. They returned, back through the trees, and skirted round until they came to another path, more overgrown than the other one, and slowly and silently made their way towards the right side of the building. Here they found a single white door, with ornamental trees in large gold pots either side, but on turning the handle discovered it was locked. They continued round the back and came into a small courtyard where they could see a flurry of movement. There were waiters and waitresses collecting boxes, crates, trays from the back of a red truck and taking them into what looked like a kitchen area. "Wait here," Erin instructed Mal, and before he could protest she hurried to the truck and started carrying a box of glasses. She hoped to blend in with the others, as they were all dressed in black just as she was. As she walked towards an open doorway, she quickly glanced across to where Mal stood watching her from the safety of the trees. He was hugging her coat she'd thrown on the ground before dashing off. Even from here she could see he was tense. Erin couldn't believe it. She was taking over, and her big brother couldn't do a thing but watch and wait. A thin, bald man with a long scar on his right cheek approached her as she went to enter the building. "Where's your ID?" he asked sharply. Erin smiled and spoke to him calmly. "It's in my inside pocket," she lied. "I'll get it out as soon as I can take this heavy box in." The man nodded, unsmiling, and gestured for her to enter the kitchen. "This is easy," she thought to herself. "Now all I've got to do is find Mum and Dad and see what they are up to."